Ravi stood at the riverbank. His grip was slick from the morning mist, the wood of the handle saturated and heavy. He adjusted his stance, but his fingers betrayed him. The iron head jerked, arcing in a sharp, metallic blur before hitting the water. A single splash shattered the surface. The ripples expanded, then died, leaving the river dark and indifferent. Ravi did not hesitate. He plunged his hands into the freezing current, his knuckles scraping against the jagged stones of the bed. He swept the silt, pushing deeper until his breath hitched from the biting cold. His palms met only mud and empty water. He pulled back, shivering, and sat heavily on the bank. His shoulders slumped as he stared at his empty, calloused hands. The tool that fed his family was gone, swallowed by the deep. He reached into the water again, fingers splayed, feeling for the weight of the iron, but found nothing but the relentless pull of the stream. He sat motionless, the silence of the woods pressing in around him, his chest tight with the sudden, crushing weight of his helplessness. A sudden, blinding surge tore through the center of the pool. Water erupted in a pillar of white light, scattering droplets that caught the morning sun like glass. Ravi shielded his eyes, scrambling back as a figure emerged from the depths and hovered above the surface. She moved without effort, her presence silencing the birds in the surrounding trees. Without a word, she dived. Seconds later, she rose, holding a massive axe that burned with the brilliance of pure gold. She held it out. The metal caught the light, casting a shimmering glow across the grass. Ravi stared at the prize. It was worth more than he could earn in a lifetime. He looked at the gold, then back at the figure, and shook his head. "That is not mine," he muttered, his voice raspy from the cold. The figure retreated into the depths. She returned instantly, holding a second axe, this one forged from polished silver. Its edge was sharp, gleaming with a pale, cold luster. Ravi felt the temptation pull at his resolve, but he looked at his empty hands and shook his head again. "No," he said firmly, "that belongs to someone else." He stood his ground, waiting as the water swirled around the visitor, testing his resolve. The figure dived a third time, the water closing over her without a ripple. Ravi held his breath, his eyes fixed on the shifting depths. A moment later, the surface broke. She rose, holding a rusted iron axe, its wooden handle splintered and worn from years of relentless labor. Ravi reached out, his fingers trembling as he traced the familiar, rough metal. This was his life, his work, his survival. "Yes," he whispered, his voice catching, "this is mine." He took the tool, the weight of the iron grounding him. The fairy stepped onto the damp grass, her feet leaving no mark on the earth. With a flick of her hand, she placed the golden axe and the silver axe on the ground beside him. They lay there, casting long, brilliant shadows across the mud. "Your truthfulness is rare," she said, her voice clear as running water. Ravi looked from the riches to the iron in his grip, realizing the transformation of his fortune. Before he could speak, the air shimmered. The visitor dissolved into the morning mist, leaving Ravi alone on the bank. He stood there, surrounded by the weight of his integrity and the impossible brightness of the gold, the forest falling back into a quiet, reverent stillness. The news of the miracle moved through the village like fire. Mohan listened from behind a thicket, his eyes locked on the distant figure of Ravi walking away with the heavy golden prize. He waited until the path was clear, then emerged into the light. He marched to the exact spot where the water had surged hours before. He scanned the forest edge, ensuring the shadows were empty, then turned his gaze to the center of the pool. He gripped his iron axe, felt the weight of it, and without a moment of hesitation, he flung it into the deep. It vanished with a splash, the ripples widening toward the bank. Mohan stood still for a heartbeat, then dropped to his knees in the wet mud. He buried his face in his palms and let out a long, jagged wail, forcing his shoulders to shake with exaggerated effort. He kept one eye open, watching the surface, waiting for the glow to return. He groaned, louder this time, throwing his head back toward the canopy to ensure his grief was heard. The water grew dark and stagnant, but Mohan continued his performance, clawing at the grass, his breath hitched in a practiced, shallow rhythm. He was ready to claim a fortune he had never earned. The water suddenly fractured into a brilliant, blinding pillar of light. Mohan scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide and hungry, pointing a shaking finger at the center of the pool. The fairy rose, her form shimmering against the dark trees. She held out the golden axe, the metal catching the sun. "Is this your axe?" she asked, her voice echoing over the river. Mohan did not hesitate. He lunged forward, his breath hitching as he shouted, Yes, that is mine, give it to me. The fairy tilted her head, her features sharpening, the light around her turning brittle and cold. She did not hand it over. She let the golden axe slip from her fingers. It did not hit the water or the mud. It dissolved into thin air before it could touch the earth. She looked at Mohan, her expression void of any mercy, and sank back into the depths. The water flattened instantly, turning back to dark, stagnant silt. Mohan clawed at the surface, plunging his arms into the freezing current, but his palms met only mud and empty water. He sat back in the muck, his own axe gone. The golden promise vanished, left with nothing but the crushing silence of the forest.